And I went back and looked at my own Medium account.
Yeah.
And I have 2 articles. And each one is 5 years apart. And I went back and I read them. And I'm like, these are really good.
The persona the name we have for your persona is a cicada. Like once every 5 years. But the thing is, like, that's said with so much love, because what it means is you're too busy living to be on the internet grind. Like, isn't that who you want to hear from? So my boss, the founder and CEO at the time, Ev, had this realization that the root of everything awful on the internet was the business model. As soon as you decide to have an ad-driven business model, you are incentivized to care about attention above all else.
Hi, Ravel.
Hey, Alice.
How's it going?
It's great.
This week we have Tony Stubblebine, the CEO of Medium. So recently you talked, of course, to Chris Best, the CEO of Substack. And I'm just curious on how you see Substack and Medium's place in the world in relation to each other or not in relation to each other. Obviously, Medium's been around a lot longer. It was founded in 2012. You know more of the history, so take it away.
Substack and Medium are both platforms that are attempting to solve both the problem of giving substantive content online, getting away from tweet length posts and putting into long form content, and addressing the issue of sustainable creation. How do you sustain authors? How do you sustain creators? How do you sustain journalism? And they have come at it from different directions. Substack is all the individual newsletter, the creator of the individual organization that empowers them as a platform. And Medium is more like a site that has sort of explored what is a collection of publication, what is the less frequent publisher, what is the way in which you can build stuff. And they're not quite competition, but they're so interesting because they're 2 models of how you can solve this problem.
One of the things I really like as a consumer of Medium is that there's a small monthly fee that gives me access to everything. They obviously differ from Substack in other ways. I think content moderation is something that you've really honed in on.
Absolutely. Content moderation is something that's been in the news a lot with Substack about which publications they allow and who they're removing and who they're monetizing. But people don't realize that there's a really interesting model for content moderation that exists inside Medium. They don't realize that Medium isn't just a one-size-fit-all thing, but there are actually publications within inside Medium that are similar to the subreddits, and those publications have people who act as moderators, act as editors, and they're deciding what content gets removed, what content gets highlighted. And so Medium handles it by empowering communities of people to do that moderation work rather than trying to provide a one-size-fit-all platform. And that's a really interesting model for how do we go forward and solve these complicated content moderation issues.
Well, in fact, you and I are editors of a publication on Medium called revolution.social. So we invite our listeners to submit articles to that. So absolutely. Well, let's listen in.
Welcome to Revolution Social, where I am looking at the history of social media with the people who built it, understanding what's happened and what we can do going forward. I am very excited to have Tony Stubblebine, who is the CEO of Medium, but who I first met at O'Reilly Media when he was an engineer there, and we brought into Odeo as our engineering manager. Tony was my boss and was one of the most incredible, caring, engaged people to work for. And someone who cares a lot about humans, cares a lot about the people he is working with. And after leading the sort of engineering management of the pivot from Odeo to create Twitter, Tony left to work on his own startups. First, a social media startup around conferences and connecting people, Crowdvine, and then looking at coaching. Took that and built a coaching business, and then started writing about it and created Better Humans, which was sort of one of the most successful publications on Medium. And through that work, ended up stepping up to become the CEO of Medium. I'm incredibly excited to have Tony here because not just is he running a platform Medium that is very important to social media, but Tony has seen this whole history of where it's come from and how it's evolved. So welcome, Tony.
Well, I mean, thank you for having me. I feel like, when you work on a project and it doesn't work out, it's incredibly frustrating. And so we had worked on podcasting in 2005. I was there only 2 or 3 months before we decided it wasn't going to work out and we started trying other things. So I'm hopeful that this foray into podcasting that we're doing today is going to be, finally, we're going to do something in podcasting that works.
Well, it is funny because I'm doing this podcast now 20 years after we were working on the first VC-backed commercial company in the podcasting space. And it's also interesting that podcasting is the one aspect of Web 2.0, the one Web 2.0 medium that stayed really open, stayed really diverse, and didn't end up with a company kind of dominating it in the same way that happened with so many other things. Photos and text like microblogging and video.
Yeah, why do you think that is? Because, I mean, for all creators, distribution's the hardest thing to get. And it would feel like every other media format has really been susceptible to, and I say this in a good way, because this is essentially the Medium offer to authors is, hey, we have distribution to share. But essentially every other media format has ended up partnering with platforms in order to get, distribution. And so, yeah, it is very notable that podcasting hasn't done that. And I don't understand, I already pay for Spotify. I would never notice if a podcast was Spotify only. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So I think part of it is Apple's benign neglect. Apple came in and they added podcasting to iTunes. They added the directory. They created the podcasting app. And for us in Odeo as a teeny startup, it drove us out of the space.
Yeah.
And then Apple didn't do much with it. They just left it as this sort of open thing, and it wasn't very important to Apple.
Right. That's it. It's because it's outside of Apple's business model. That's where that benign neglect comes from, and still is. It's too small to matter, probably. And you would never give up the Apple ecosystem just to be in some walled garden. Yeah.
And we saw Spotify try and do it, but what we see now is the reason we're doing a video podcast in part is because we upload the whole thing to YouTube and we then clip it to find the interesting moments and segments and bits that can go viral and then lead to people discovering the podcast and engaging in a deeper way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. I mean, right, I guess that happens everywhere. I mean, I think about text, right, that it does show up in one place, but people are always trying to repurpose it. And I wonder if that'll actually get stronger in the era of AI. Because now you could write something and have it get turned into a video and get auto-clipped for you. So it's kind of, we're entering a weird moment where the volume of content is going to go way up. It's not just more creators, but that each creation is going to get amplified. I think I've said this publicly. I think Medium saw a 10x increase in the number of things posted after AI. Most of it was slop. I mean, so essentially our job got a little bit harder on the filtering side, actually a lot harder on the filtering side. But yeah, that's going to be true. I mean, that's true on every platform right now.
I wonder if you could talk about that in a way, because I know that Medium has gone through many iterations, and there have been at one point paid editors, and now there are publications on Medium that some people don't know about, but function similar to subreddits, where there's an editorial voice, there's people, there's curation, and so you have algorithms to discover things, but they are very driven by human curation. And I wonder if you could talk about the way in which that human curation and the people reading it deals with AI slop and deals with finding what is worth reading.
first of all, I love that this phrase AI slop has so much virality to it. I kind of think it was coined by a reporter writing about Medium first, and then other places. And I remember being really annoyed by the piece because she found the existence of AI slop, but then didn't seem to get that it doesn't matter too much whether it exists. It matters whether it gets read. And so I thought the whole piece was sort of nonsensical. It was a piece about the extra work we have to do on recommendation systems, not about like, oh, Medium is getting flooded. Medium readers are not getting flooded. And I think for this reason that you're getting at, that we were kind of lucky. We'd already built human systems. And, people, like a lot of things in technology, they sound new, but they're actually old, right? And I think like AI content is, sure, it's AI generated, but the issue is old. It's just spam, right? Or it's spam or it's low quality. That's the actual issue. So we already had systems in place to spot and filter and reject that stuff. And it just was a matter of, oh, we're getting a lot more. And so when people think of it as an AI problem, they get really wrapped up in, can you be 100% sure that you've detected whether this was AI generated? And it's like, well, that's not even the issue. The problem is that it sucks. And that's a problem we've been dealing with on like every social media platform since, day one. And even though I think there will be a lot more AI generated content, we still think like writing has legs because humans are not going to stop being human. Like we're always going to be curious. I think people who write first of all to examine their own thoughts, right? Can't have someone else do that for you right now. And I think they write to connect it with other people. It's a way to connect with other people. So there's just a ton of pure human activity that doesn't get, like AI does not replace that. And because of that, we have human curators, we have publications which play a curational role. Essentially, almost everything that ever gets recommended to you got read by a human that we trust beforehand, right? And they're just filtering out not all of it, but or maybe better to say filtering in, like, hey, like this is a piece that matters, right? And before they say something matters, they're judging, is there a human story here? Which again goes back to this idea, like I'm like shaking my head. We're often saying we're a humans first company, which is like, to me, mind blowing, right? Like if we could just like back up and examine what the hell are we doing as an industry? Like we all grew up with like the movie Terminator is essentially mythology, right? We don't want the machines to replace us. And then as soon as AI gets any good, people just get obsessed with replacing each other, right? And I just, that's not happening. That's not what we're about. And the same, like the idea that AI could write as well as a human is like this complete misunderstanding of what writing is, right? Like I think maybe naively some people think writing is about efficient communication and about facts and information, but it's not. It's about a story. And we already, again, what's new is old is we've already been through this idea that you could make stories more efficient with Cliff Notes. Like before,
we had summaries,
right? The Cliff Notes did not replace the book. Like, your humanities professor did not say, oh, the Odyssey. Yeah. The story is Odysseus had a hard time getting home. End of story, right? Like, sure, you could condense that book into one sentence and it would do nothing for you. And that's true for every story. And I think because I'd come from coaching, I'd seen a lot of the greater self-help industry. And so if you read a self-help book, I think it's really interesting how inefficient the information delivery is. Because a lot of times the whole first half of the book is going to be social proof. Like success stories. Oh, if you do this advice, your life will be so much better. Blah, 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 blah. And you're like, but what's the advice? Tell me what to do. Well, the advice is always really simple. But before you get the advice, you have to build up the confidence that it's going to work. And I think that's true at all sorts of like micro levels. Like if you're getting technical advice, you want to know who's giving it to you, because that gives you some faith that, oh, I'm in the same situation, like, and therefore it's worth my time to pursue this. So like everything that you're reading, it needs this human context around it. And unless the AI is out living a similar life to how you live, until we're to that point, it's just never going to have the right context and emotional valence required. And I mean, I'm not trying to even be like woo-woo about this. I mean, this is like literally how our brains work. Like we are emotional creatures. Like there's neuroscience about this.
When you talk about the way in which our brains work and how we're wired for stories, and how even as the technology changes, we're the same people, it reminds me of a conversation we had 20 years ago during the hackathons that created Twitter. There was a month or so that we were doing these weekly hackathons. We had a conversation about the history of media and the way in which people are the same throughout, like we evolved hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so we had a thing we did around the campfire. We had a thing we did at the coffee shop. We had a thing you did at the university when you were connected to the Unix computers and sharing it. And you then were talking to us about how do we do that thing with mobile phones that became Twitter. And now it's how do we do that thing in an era where we have ubiquitous computing, where we have, all of these smartphones and now all of these large language models. But we're still working on the same problems.
There was a talk that my boss, who was our boss at Odeo, Ev Williams, he gave a talk at XOXO, maybe the first one. And the talk was about entrepreneurship, and it was essentially make something that people already want to do easier. That's what we're trying to do. So yeah, I do, maybe we'll talk about hype waves a little bit, because I thought that was one of the big lessons of Odeo. But one of the things I've learned about a hype wave is a lot of times it's really confusing if it's being driven by technologists, because they'll forget that we're still human, right? They'll get like, what could the technology do? And then there's a product wave after that, which is, I think the AI wave just shifted from like really being driven by technologists to being more driven by product people. The product people will think in the human terms. What is a human trying to do that this will help them achieve? And I say this like this was such a harsh lesson from Odeo, which I think every person from startups, like every curious person wonders, why do all of my projects fail, right? It's hard not to spend a huge amount of time wondering that stuff. And so what I thought about Odeo was not just that Apple put us out of business, but that we were too early. Like, even if Apple hadn't put us out of business, what were we going to do with podcasting in 2005? It just wasn't ready. But you wait 10 years later, and podcasting is really taking off, right? And so that was a pretty harsh lesson that let me be patient through a whole set of waves. And I think one more thing about podcasting is I thought media was too late to blogging. And so they felt burned. And so when they saw podcasting, they jumped on it too early as sort of a pendulum shift. And so I'm just like always really careful when a hype wave comes up. And so like I got to skip messaging systems. Like, there was a year where you could raise money just on like a chat interfaces, like way before AI. I skipped crypto, which, you could debate. Like, people have made money. I still don't get the full utility of it.
Turns out you can make a lot of money inventing currencies.
Sure. Right. And I think we mostly skipped the first wave of AI. But I also knew what I was waiting for, and actually I've suddenly gotten a lot more interested in the last couple of months. But it all comes from being burned on Odeo. what I remember from Odeo is like the two podcasts that I thought about the most were the super produced one from Adam, who is the MTV VJ?
Adam Curry.
Adam Curry, right? Super produced. Like this is a guy that like was deep in media. But then the one that I thought that was the most interesting was Venture Voice, which was just two venture capitalists and investors essentially driving down 280 on the way to a meeting. And, you know, the sound quality was terrible. The narrative arc, terrible. The personality actually quite good, because this is Dave Hornick, right? Like, yeah, that guy has a lot of personality, maybe too much. And, but we heard things that we'd never heard before. And that's what it's the sort of the idea of user-generated content to me is the idea that my wisdom can be your wisdom, and that can be done at scale. So anyone, like everything that I want to do, other people have done before me, and I wish they'd shared it and I could learn from them. And that's, I think, what got me into blogging originally. And that was the kind of the thing that I got most excited about in podcasting was not, oh, like here's a new distribution format for professional media, but here's a way where we can hear people that, you know, you wouldn't normally have heard from. And, you know, I think that tension is always happening. And I think podcasting to me feels like it's stayed more on the professional end. Like even industry people tend to have a professional goal around it. Whereas writing, because it's so much more accessible, still tends to get a lot more amateur content creators who, like, this word amateur is tricky because it sounds like low quality, but it's not, because they are professionals at something else. And that's the thing you would rather hear directly from the source.
To me, it gets back to the really most powerful thing, which is this is a profoundly democratizing transformation where, and that's not new in the history of media. Like, you know, all the way back to the printing press, it was a democratizing effort, even if it was expensive to have a printing press and very expensive to print books. Each time we're doing this, we are going through a wave of saying more people can participate and have a voice. And now podcasting, you know, we have all these fancy microphones and things like that. We care about audio quality and editing, but it is still much more accessible than it was before. And people who have a voice can engage and build in it. And Medium is a place where people can write. And I went back and looked at my own Medium account. Yeah. And I have 2 articles. And each one is 5 years apart. And I went back and I read them. And I'm like, these are really good. Like, these were moments in, you know, one of them was an essay on Pepe Mujica winning the election in Uruguay, and like a comparison of Uruguayan politics and American politics, and how did Uruguayan politics produce this person. And I am a uniquely, like, I'm one of the few people who could have produced that essay. And because I existed in these 2 worlds, and on its own, like, I didn't want to create an entire newsletter. I didn't want it to be a professional activity. It was like, I had this idea and I wanted to share it, and I had this space to do it.
The persona the name we have for your persona is a cicada, like once every 5 years. But the thing is, like, that's said with so much love, because what it means is you're too busy living to be on the internet grind. Like, isn't that who you want to hear from? Like, I think we really put a lot of effort into designing Medium so that a person that doesn't write that often could show up and get an audience, that they wouldn't have to build an audience on their own. And it's for this reason, because, like, if you have to manufacture something to write every single day, you run out of material. You start kind of making it up. And you see that in a lot of the punditry in the world. It's like, they don't really believe what they're saying. They just believe it'll play, you know? And I just, like, much rather that people go live an interesting life and show up every now and then and share it. And so that pattern of writing every 5 years is perfect, actually. If we could get everyone to do that, we would have plenty of content, right?
The periodic writer, or the writer that has something to say, or someone else, it's something that I think is very interesting in what you're doing with Medium, because you're finding a very different way to deal with content discovery, audience creation, audience curation that isn't an algorithm that is driven by clicks. I know that Medium at some point has experimented with a financial model that was the more likes, the more claps, the more views that this particular article got, the more return on it was. And it chased a BuzzFeed style, like, my goal is to get sort of maximum attention around this, and I want to get exactly the right headline, and I want to get everything else, as opposed to satisfaction and overall quality of both the creator and the consumer of it. And I know that you've done a lot of work in Medium around changing what you're optimizing for. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah. And it's great because we've had a couple different eras, so we can really say what works and what doesn't work. So originally, the main pivot, essentially in 2017 for Medium, is this experiment in business models. And this is before I was CEO, but I was closely partnered with Medium at that point. And so my boss, this founder and CEO at the time, Ev, had this realization that the root of everything awful on the internet was the business model. As soon as you decide to have an ad-driven business model, you are incentivized to care about attention above all else. And it's like that in content that shows up in two really gross ways. Like, one is that you're kind of unincentivized to write something great. Because it's like, if you think about it, it's like, I get you onto the page. If you're too engrossed in the article, you're going to miss the ads, right? It's like, it just has to be good enough for you to click on. It doesn't, no better. Or good enough for you to click on and scroll to the bottom, but no better, because it's all just a vehicle for the ads. And then it really incentivizes the stuff that I think most people would say is the worst of the internet: misinformation, division, like hate, anger. Like, it just like, it's all of these things grab attention without offering any real substance back. But because it's grabbed your attention, you get to have a successful ad business. So Ev switched us to a single bundled subscription that any writer on Medium can participate in. And so this is an experiment. No one has ever done that with the UGC platform before, but he did it because he thought, if we charged the customer directly, then our incentives would be aligned. And ever since, it's been this Goldilocks quest to take this experiment and make it perfect, right? And so there's two experiments that predate me, and then I'll tell you the one that I've led. So the first is, he's like, oh, okay, now that I've done this, like, it would stand to reason that people really want to pay for the highest quality. So why don't I, on top of everything else, go hire like 100 of the top media professionals and start generating new journalism to put onto the platform? And he did this, and the journalism was fantastic. And it lost, like, let's say $50 million a year. And it's not just that it turned out to be a bad business. It's like, I, as someone who was a partner at the time, I was like, I couldn't quite articulate it, but what I would say now is that betrayed the platform. All of the traffic is coming from amateur writers, right? Like, the whole reason that you have this platform to launch professional writing into is because of all of this user-generated content. And so you're going to rob them of the traffic that would normally go to them in order to give them to professional media. Like, why did you...
Who are you paying at a loss?
At a loss, right? But it's like, why have a blogging platform at all? Why not just start a media business? Why not start a new Huffington Post or something at that point? It's like, if you're going to do it on a blogging platform, you can't rob the foundation in order to pay traditional media. That's one. And then also, just as like an entrepreneur, I feel like you only live once. The point of entrepreneurship is to make something that wouldn't otherwise exist in the world. And I was like, I felt like that path was, okay, we're going to do the Atlantic, or like, we're going to, or like all, like the stuff that we were writing, someone else for the most part probably would cover that somewhere. And, I think the media industry is not that profitable, but those people are at least a little bit profitable, right? So it just like it really didn't make any sense, even though the people were great, the execution was great, the content was great. But because of that, we were able to build up a pretty big subscriber base. And so that's where I can tell you that the next experiment, which is what you were referencing, did not work. Is then we switched to, okay, get rid of that experiment and instead just pay the community. But what we paid on was attention. Even though like we built the business model to create an incentive for us not to care about that, our sort of everyone's pre-existing like idea of how to do recommendation systems is very attention based. And so it's like we're optimizing for clicks and reads and whatnot. And even as we got slightly better than that standard approach, it was still just attention. The people that were winning were like attention grabbers. And so there's like 3 playbooks essentially, none of which were on mission for us. So one was just get rich quick. Like Medium was swamped with get rich quick stuff because it's like, oh, we're giving money away. Oh shit. Like the whole, like every hustler wants that, right?
Yeah. But which is exactly the dynamic we're seeing in Twitter today, where you see all of these sort of people who go and they collect a bunch of things and they make these tweet streams and they are like, this is the, it is super exciting and interesting, and they don't give you all of the information. They give you the hook before the first tweet, so they get you to the next one, and then in the end, they're either trying to get the money out of Twitter for the incentives, or they're trying to drive you to sign up for their thing.
There's this great phrase for that style of writing, Broetry, which I feel like I'm able to use it without ever defining it, because people like immediately are like, yeah, that. And it started on LinkedIn and then is definitely taking over Twitter right now. Twitter, as we call it. I'm really resistant to.
Yeah, I'm gonna just dead name it. Like
yeah, totally.
If
right.
he's gonna be transphobic, we get to dead name Twitter.
This is look, I didn't have a problem adopting pronouns and whatnot, but I was on a meeting with some Meta people, and I just could not stop referring to their company as Facebook. I'm just like, I'm sorry, and same. It's always going to be Twitter to me until people stop understanding what I mean. So all right, so that's one. The other 2 listicles, but to me the funniest one is a bunch of people had articles that made $10,000-$20,000 that were essentially, the playbook was take a Wikipedia article, put a viral headline on it, and rewrite it as Broetry. And so it's just you could take top 10 scandals of Queen Elizabeth II, right? And just right now, actually, that's one I've tested with AI. I was like, take this Wikipedia article, make a viral headline and rewrite it as Broetry. And I was like, oh, darn, that would do so well in a lot of media ecosystems. But it's like, wait, why did we pay $20,000 for that? We're trying to bring something new into the world. They're so off mission. And thankfully, because we get to run the test, is we built up all these subscribers with this high quality journalistic take, and then we went to that mode, and we just started losing subscribers left and right. So I took over Medium, and I had this idea in my head, which I had actually always been in Ev's ear about, which was, look, the most commercially viable writing on the internet is always going to come from getting a person to write about their own profession. So they're an amateur writer with a valuable professional experience. And I knew this because, as you mentioned, we met at O'Reilly. O'Reilly at one point was the main information source for all of the tech sector. This is before the internet was the internet. It was being built off of people that were reading O'Reilly books. And the way that an O'Reilly book works is that you get an editor who's a pretty good programmer to hire a really good programmer to write a book. And it's the books are not coming from journalists; they're coming from subject matter experts. And so like the kind of the publishing empire that I had built on Medium was always based on that. Like how can I get someone who's a professional in some other area of their life to write about it?
So I've on this podcast, I've interviewed Jack, and I've also interviewed Chris Best, founder and CEO of Substack. And the amazing thing about that, and then talking to you, is the importance of understanding how to design systems that align the incentives of the company, the incentives of the protocols, the incentives of the platforms with the pro-social behavior that you want. And the fundamental damage that a advertising model has done to the way we engage it, the addictive behavior or the problems with algorithms or the problems with rabbit holing people, in so many ways, those are downstream from the design of the incentive structures. So like now you have a new set of incentive structures with Medium that is advocating for a new set of things. And I know that you have talked about how Medium has become profitable recently. I don't know if it's profitable at the moment, but you figured out the incentive systems. And I wonder if you could talk about sort of how you had a conversation with people on the team and your writers and the community to find that alignment.
Yeah, I mean, it was helpful to have a pretty strong sense of what would work coming in. So it wasn't quite as much like consensus building as might otherwise have been required. But the main thing that I understood coming in was that a recommendation system is already built on human signals, and we're just missing an important signal, which is expertise. And so we have to design some system that brings expertise in. And so we started with a program called the Boost, but essentially we lean on the publication editors to have some expertise, and then we filter what they recommend through our internal curation, because there's always some level of like but how much can we trust these people that aren't on our payroll, right? And that combination of kind of external expertise, there's just something about running a publication on Medium with as you say, like a subreddit where anyone can submit to it. You end up just swimming in the topic, and that creates a level of expertise just on like what matters. Have I seen this advice before? What's resonating with people in a good way? Because sometimes the other article that would always do well on Medium that sucked was like a 22-year-old going, "Is JavaScript dead?" And it's like, well, you wouldn't know. Maybe, but you're not going to be the person to know it, right? And so anyways, so like that external expertise and then our internal curation team just label essentially like, hey, this is like it. There's thoughtfulness and some amount of reason to believe that the person is informed, right? And like, I think that's the thing. It's not that everything on Medium has to be right, but I'm so tired of people just making up advice that they have no idea about and just thinking because I can write it and write it with strong words, then therefore people should hear it, right? And so it's interesting. I like through experience now we have a little bit of a better sense of how much of the change in the type of quality that does well on Medium is that we're filtering stuff in versus filtering stuff out. And I think it's actually, I'm a little bit surprised how much the filtering out matters, because then the secondary kind of axis of quality is how specific is it to what you care about. Right. So, I mean, I could tell you what I think the top 200 high quality articles are on Medium in a day. But if it doesn't have a podcasting one, then maybe the best podcasting story is the one that Rabble you're going to care about the most. So like getting that balance right is hard, but at least like we've helped to filter out the trashiest of stuff. And by the way, this whole like doing recommendations always drives people nuts because there's like some pre-existing fear around censorship. And I think that fear gets worse if there's humans involved. Somehow people are fine if they're getting censored by an algorithm. I don't know what that's about. But, like, we're not, except for hate, which we can get into, we're not in the censorship business. We're in the deciding which distribution to give out. It's like freedom of reach, not freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. And so, our business, we're paid to be as good as we can at giving reach to the stories that people are happy to have paid to read, right? And so, like, anyone can write on Medium and share that post. And, recently Medium has gotten a lot better at helping people build email subscribers. We don't have to get into this, but like literally we're like 20 times better than we were 2 months ago. And it's like part of rebalancing how Medium works so that there's this like competitive opportunity to win readers. And it's competitive around our sort of expertise-driven algorithm. It's not, and then a consistent ability to reach that whatever audience you've been able to build. So look, if you join a platform, right? We sort of said this at the beginning. You join a platform trying to take some of their readership for yourself, right? That's what we're all doing on all these platforms. And the rules of Medium really are designed to benefit someone like you, who's a cicada, or people that really are writing about some personal experience that other people are going to find valuable.
So, that it's fascinating. I had Renee DiResta, who has done a bunch of studying on takedowns and electoral interference and was part of the Stanford Internet Observatory. And she said that takedowns are the things that everyone freaks out about, the thing that are censorship. And then they also freak out about shadow banning and the algorithm not getting me things. But when you think about the platforms and the fact that there has to be an algorithm, even if it's reverse chronological, what really matters is what you're talking about, which is like, how do you find and surface to people the things they want to see? Yeah. And that what kind of behavior and experience does that encourage?
Yeah, right. I know. And I mean, it's always tricky. I never got to be the target before this. I'd always been on the sidelines watching this debate about freedom of speech. And it's really interesting to be the target finally. I've been hoping that I could
really,
be.
I want that.
Right?
I want a bunch of people to be pissed at me.
But you know how sort of people who come from a programming background are like too literal, too logical sometimes. So like I was a programmer originally. And so I have a hard time, anytime this topic comes up now, I have a hard time just getting past the simple fact that like on a given day, sometimes 90% of what gets posted to Medium gets taken down. Right? Like we are literally required to take down like CSAM, the like sort of that's like child abuse material, right? Like there's this.
How do you get CSAM in a mostly text-based interface?
But we have images, right?
Yeah,
and
sure.
That's not the primary thing, but like that would be an example. No, like those people aren't writing to me afterwards, calling me names, right? Like I'm not getting like called in front of Congress over this, right? Because we all agree we don't want that stuff on the platform at all, right? And so it's like crypto, airdrop, scams, like plagiarism, copyright violations. Like there's this like there's just like straight up spam, right? It's like, hey, this is just a Viagra ad. We don't need it, right? And none of those people complain. People who complain are, essentially, I just think it's whatever era, there's going to be this tiny, tiny sliver that is being debated, I guess, right now. And what I like actually about the current era of social media is it fragmented enough that I don't think you can really call anyone a monopoly anymore. Like there's 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 Twitters right now. Like I would say Twitter decomposed into X, Threads, Blue Sky, no one would debate that. Mastodon, we wish it was doing better, but no one would debate that. But I actually think a lot of Twitter went to Discord, right? And so, like,
and group chats and WhatsApp group chats and Signal group chats and all these other spaces.
all of that stuff, right? And so, if you're not in a monopoly, I think we think it gives us a little bit more freedom to say, hey, we just don't want this here. And there's something about probably like the most common one, like I'll get attacked, and they'll never say why, but they'll say what's wrong with me, and it'll always say, oh, Tony, you're a misogynist, and I'm like, you wrote something anti-trans, didn't you? Like that's like how that went from I'm a misogynist, I don't know. But it's like it's such a classic case of like we have these really thoughtful trans writers on Medium who know what they're talking about because they're writing about their own lives. And then we have people who were taught gender and sex is the same thing when they were in kindergarten, and they want to force that on all of us, right? And it's just like, look, by definition, there's more than two genders because it's socially constructed. If you mean sex, then whoa, the science on that is weird and crazy, right? Like it's not
it's not the binary that you think once you even look at the biology, but culture and constructed culture identity is so much more complicated than that. And then and so it's fascinating because you have these different people trying to play the refs and censorship.
Yeah.
And I know we've been going on for a while here, but
wait, I wanted to say one thing about this.
Yeah.
It's like, so Medium is like, let's say, one touch more aggressive about like keeping trans hate down than other platforms. I think that's true. And I think the benefit of it is that and like a lot of other sort of divisive, hateful speech, because we're like just a shade better at toning that down across the platform. Do you know who the primary beneficiary is? Data scientists, programmers, data scientists. It's like, it's not that, oh, like this is so good for the trans writers here. It means there's all of this oxygen is suddenly available for people to talk about the topics that are actually killing on Medium on a given day, which are like data science, AI, technology, relationships, like self-improvement, health, fitness. Like everyone is having substantial conversations because they're not in a stupid debate about a thing that doesn't really affect you. Like mainstream US news will get obsessed about Division I women's swimming. Like I never in a million years would ever have thought I might have an opinion on the Davidson swim team. And then it's gotten worse. It's like, wait, like now we're talking about middle school fencing in middle America? Like what? None of this stuff matters to your average person. And so I think like that's kind of the lesson that we learned about trust and safety is it makes space for things that people actually do care about. And we know they care about because they pay us, right?
yeah, I mean that's the thing that I ended up saying in the Breaking the Bird documentary, which is like, you thought you could make the internet this entirely open, like free speech thing, and we empower people, and people do have Medium, like they have these different places in which they can publish, but that within the context of a particular place on the internet, the speech of some and the activities of some can either directly silence or drown out the others, and then you don't have that space for those other talks.
Yeah.
So I want to get into a little bit of a sort of take a step back. Medium doesn't exist alone. Medium is a single platform and everything else, but Medium has competitors, as it were. Like there is Substack, there is Ghost, you could do self-hosting, there's these other platforms, you could, be a writer and get supported on Patreon, you can do things. What do you see as sort of your role in that ecosystem and the effective right to exit? You can take your content and republish it elsewhere. How does that more open ecosystem, give you the freedom to make Medium its own thing?
Yeah, I mean, I love it, and I feel like my top job actually is to get out of any sense that we're competing, right? That like, is there some way that I can say Medium is great for this, and like these other sort of like, you mentioned some what I would call like pro tools on one side, which I think is Substack, Patreon, Gumroad, and then you have like a different set of pro tools, which is like Own Your Business, WordPress. And like in between those is this huge ocean of people that I think just fundamentally just value simplicity. They want to write and publish on the internet and worry about as little as possible beyond that. So the medium I inherited always had the tooling for that, right? It's like, oh, thank God, I don't have to set up my own software. I don't have to find a place to host it. I don't have to do a lot of configuration. I can just show up, start writing. Like, I don't even have to start a blog. I can just write and publish, right? Like, and so it was even subtly simpler than Tumblr at that point, right? But then the second half of it is I'm publishing online for a reason. So how can we make it simpler for you to find an audience without having to do, the big internet hustle? And so we talked about the recommendation systems. We sort of touched on Medium runs on this world of community run publications like a subreddit. And so you can just show up and say, oh, I'm a paleontologist. I want to talk to other paleontologists or people that love dinosaur bones. You've got multiple publications that you could just go write for, right? Like I use that as like the niche, like that's the type of niche that exists on Medium. And I think of that as like just the way in which social media tools get more powerful the more you simplify the task for people. And so then, but I say like there's this Pro Tool version where it's like, hey, I need to, like, if you need to own everything, if you need to monetize everything, and you're willing to do that, commit to doing that as an independent, then like there are other tools for that, ConvertKit, Substack, all that stuff. But I think, in general, even if you're there, every Substack author should be cross-posting to Medium because your job is to, to commit to building an audience, right? And Medium has an audience and we'll give you some, right? But it's not true that like very few people that I want to hear from on the internet have the time to commit to full-time marketing of their work. Like I almost think that's an anti-pattern.
And the person who optimizes for marketing isn't the person who is likely to have the most interesting thing to say.
Exactly. Right. So that's our space, right? And actually, I have diagrams that are just like, here's a boundary, WordPress is on this side. Here's a boundary, and the Pro Tools are on this side of it. And there's overlap a lot of times, and I think we've left more overlap than we wanted to, and I think that changed. I think because it's like the first time experience can be great on Medium, but then we weren't doing a good job of building a consistent audience, and that just flipped a couple months ago. That's why we were making that change, and then I think it becomes more clear. Like I think about a lot of times like a book author, right? It's like you got to build up an audience in order to announce the launch of your book, but you don't need to build up paying subscribers. You just need to build up as many people as possible. And so I think that's the type of make money goal that we care about, or we care about people that are trying to make money as consultants or whatnot. But we're not really, it's not our primary goal to help people make a living as a creator. That's not our primary goal. And we know a lot and like a lot of those people, but I actually, as you say, it's good that some other tool does think that's their primary goal.
The sort of failure state is the monolithic ecosystem that is Facebook, Meta, where a single company and a single person on the top of it has access to the world's audiences, and their decisions on trust and safety and their decisions on algorithms and optimization and all these other things end up being the decisions for every language and every culture and every community in the world.
Yeah, it's like you want things that have enough size to matter, I think. I mean, there's too much fragmentation, and I think you don't get enough investment in it, right? But too little, and then things get really boring and bland, and feel really constrained. But we're in kind of this golden era where you can find social experiences that fit who you are. I actually think it's pretty exciting.
I find the era we're in right now to be the most exciting since those early Web 2.0 days. So when when we had Flickr and the emergence of podcasting and Twitter, and you had even MySpace and all these other sort of, and all the little platforms and things like that. The thing I worked on after leaving Odeo was Yahoo Pipes for a while, which is like, let's do mashups and reconnect it and stuff. And so there was this incredibly creative moment where we were changing the world and inventing social media effectively. And then it became like this place where a few companies sort of dominated, and they ended up making billions of dollars on advertising, and were able to sort of block everyone out for a while.
Yeah.
And now we're not there. Now it feels like it's cracked open again.
Yeah, the way I describe it is I think the internet got bigger, and that means that you can have multiple big companies. And there's something, I mean, this is maybe like not universally agreed to, but I think there's something about an opportunity that's big enough that it gets like really serious people investing in making something great. And when I was running that company in the conference business, the experience I had was that all software in that world was too fragmented. There was like 180 different conference registration providers. And as a result, none of them were good because none of them were big enough businesses to be worthy of real investment. And there was no like, oh, if I make something great, I can win a big market. And especially on platforms, you want it to be big enough that you feel like, oh, I can reach a meaningful audience. And so this is like maybe, again, it's sort of a Goldilocks thing where we didn't have any access to social media platforms at one point. Then we got this experimentation phase, but then we got monopolies. Weren't great. Now we're getting, I don't know, something different. And to me, it's exciting. And also, maybe it's just true on the internet, we're not building forever companies, even though every hyperbolic CEO wants to say that they are, right? And so it's just like, look, I love Twitter for like the first 6 years. And then it was just okay. And now I don't even use it, right? And that was great. Like, am I supposed to be sad about that? I had a 6-year run where Twitter was like a huge part of my social life, right? And it could be that that's part of what's going to go on with social media platforms too, where you have periods where you're you have a really hot moment and make a lot of connections, and a lot of times these connections they transfer to the real world, and then we're like friends for life, right?
Yeah, I mean that's what we want. We want the human connection. I mean, it gets back to the thing we were talking about at the beginning, which is like humans are gonna human. Like, we are gonna do this connection, and we are gonna do these things, and we want to achieve the same kind of things, and we have the same sets of goals. But as we build these technology platforms, we let ourselves do it with different constraints. The physics of how we connect change,
Yeah.
but the incentives are gonna shape what that is and what goes on in it, and then that's gonna fall out to shape how it affects society. It's if we're the same in all times, like, you can introduce mediums that cause negative things. Like, radio was amazing, but it also empowered authoritarians to give their speeches and reach like audiences. And Hitler and Mussolini and others would never have been able to sort of dominate the conscience and create the conception of authoritarian nationalism without it. Would Trump have been able to take over the Republican Party without a particular kind of trolling access to viral social media? Probably not. So we have to be careful about what incentives we build into these systems.
Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff just feels a little above my pay grade. The sort of like building companies in order to progress all of human civilization. It's like, well, I'm not sure I have actually my hands on all the right levers for that, but I do. I just try to simplify it to what's a life well led, right? And so like, can I build companies? My last one and working at this one, to me, just feel like time well spent. Like I'm like, there's just something inherently healthy about writing, and then something kind of awe-inspiring about the best of human impulses to share your life experience with someone else so that their life can be better. And yeah, sometimes there's commercial goals in the middle there, but that's the essence of blogging. And every day that I've been a part of Medium, either on the outside or now on the inside, I've just felt really like it was time well spent.
I know you say that it isn't explicitly like this large political project, but in the sort of small p politics around changing human dynamics and relations and everything else, precisely that of we are empowering people to have authentic connections, to have real things, to create together, to build communities, to have a voice where they're participating. That is the revolution. Like that is the real change. And I don't think we can deny that what we're doing and what we have worked on has changed the world.
I think that's true. And there's I think a Medium's role in politics right now is because we're not about punditry. Like that's not the main thing going on. So sometimes it doesn't even feel like politics is the main topic. But I think the role we play is well actually. Like we're the well actually reply guys, because like you're like, wait, we're doing what to vaccines now? And it's like, oh, suddenly there's a whole mess of academics on Medium being like, well, actually, this is a really bad idea, and here's why, right? Or like tariffs, it's like, oh, turns out there's a whole bunch of economists on Medium who are just like, okay, I haven't written in a while, but I gotta say something here, right? Or raw milk. I mean, this was one this is like the idea that we are like partisan is hilarious to me, right? Like I never in a million years would be pushing any angle related to raw milk, but suddenly it's like in the news and it's like, oh, well, turns out again, a bunch of academics have weighed in here, and it's like, I don't know, you're probably not going to die, but you're probably not going to live that much longer because of it. And also, FYI, here are the risks, right? And so, like, these things are, it's like, it's nice to have a place where you can go and hear from experts. But then again, it's also not the case that we're a monopoly. And so it's not that you can't have the debate, but there's just a place where you can get kind of one angle where the people talking are most likely to have, or more likely to have some, deep experience in it, or the people that you're hearing from.
But that's a political project. Like even if you don't want it to be political, building a platform that prioritizes and highlights and promotes expertise around topics when there are conspiracy theories, when there are viral stuff, when there's sort of misinformation.
Yeah.
Then the source of how do you platform the expertise, how do you platform, accurate information where you can have an accurate debate is an important political project.
It turns out to be, although I also really bristle at the idea, and it's like when people say political, they often imply partisan, right? And that's what I really bristle at, right? Because it's like, look, we're coming at this with a set of values. And it's not our job to cater to the political fads of some regional government group, right? Like imagine if we were living in New Zealand. Why the heck would we care what Republicans care about today, or what the Republican Party cares about? Like we're like the thing that we're working on has some like prior value system to it, right? And so we just have to kind of adhere to that. And that's why I say it's almost like we're anti-partisan, because we really just don't care whether or not we're aligning one way or the other. That's their job. And maybe the most political thing that I think is that I did get indoctrinated into the US Constitution and actually believe a lot of the things, right? And one of the things I believe is that we're in a representative democracy. So by definition,
and we should defend the representative democracy and the plurality of it.
They represent me. I don't represent them. What are you talking about, right? And so just everything about the way in which the work we do, people try to politicize it, just really makes me bristle. in part because I know it's not what we're doing, and also in part because if you ask me what are my actual political views, it's like American patriotism, and everything about the debate is like just feels fundamentally unpatriotic to me. It's like, you didn't read the Constitution, did you? and so yeah, like I don't know, it's frustrating and annoying, I would say.
I find it incredibly frustrating. I also think that your political stance on this, which is like the goal is to highlight the space for a certain kind of expertise, the space for a certain kind of conversation, isn't in some ways different than the early political goals that Ev, Biz, and Jack were trying to cultivate in Twitter, which is everybody thought Twitter was a project to advance a certain kind of liberal San Francisco values and like certain kind of progressivism. And there were all these different Twitters on it. But really, even though I, as sort of an anarchist and a leftist and everything else, had my views, what I saw Twitter after we left was this thing that was trying to do what you're trying to do with Medium, where it wasn't this thing. And now we see Elon trying to use Twitter with the partisan, but like putting that pressure on it. And it almost doesn't work when you make it that kind of explicitly partisan.
Yeah, right. Because it turns out this is the other sort of mistake of people is like people don't actually care that much about politics. I think politicians think they're more interesting than they are, right? And like that's maybe one of the lessons from the business model change is like if I ask what will you click on, you're going to click on like really divisive politics. If I ask what will you be happy to have paid to read, it's not that. And so I think that we discovered that actually people don't value that political discourse or the political debate nearly as much as it looks like when you're in an ad-driven system. And yet, I feel like I'm being a little cavalier in that it's like in that, or I might be sounding that way. It's like, people's lives are at stake in a lot of ways, right? And it's like our leaders matter. A bad politician in the U.S. is going to lead to a couple 100,000 unnecessary deaths, right? And a terrible one, millions, right? And so, fingers crossed, like what we have right now. But I think we saw that in the COVID administration, right? And so, yeah, it does matter. It's also like, there's kind of a mantra I'd learned early on. It's like, pick a lane and fill it. A lot of people who care about politics, like care about every issue, right? And as a result, they're ineffective at everything, right? And it's like, there's a thing that I can really focus on bringing, into the world, and Medium can. And so again, this is why I bristle about ever being labeled as partisan, or like, is that, no, really explicitly, we've chosen just to fill one lane. And that's like bringing thoughtful and informed information to the world. And that's it. We don't have to, we're not doing regime change or like anything like that. That's not what we're about. And we're just giving voice to people that are thoughtful and informed. That's it. And that's a good, important lane to fill right now.
Been wrapping it up by asking folks, who else should we be talking to? Who else should I should be talking to on this podcast about what is the future of social media? Where does that intersect with what we're building? What kind of rights should have? What kind of, like, really getting into how does this stuff work as opposed to the surface stuff of what it experiences like as a user.
I'm always interested in Mike McHugh, the Flipboard founder, who's like very active in sort of the Mastodon and world now, because I think he's taking a design and product lens to essentially what had been very like kind of open source ethos. And then anyone from Threads, I have to say I'm like really enamored with Threads. Do I have time to tell you why?
I would love to hear what you.
It's a simple like business model and bundling admiration, which is like I don't know, bundling as a business model concept comes up all the time. You could say the New York Times is like a bundled subscription, and like these components like recipes and whatnot like help with retention and like help make the whole business like flywheel work, right? But I had never quite seen how you can bundle social media platforms at the follow and interest graph so successfully. And so what's kind of interesting about how Threads has been able to get early traction is you show up and everyone you follow on Instagram, you follow automatically. And then you're there, and then finally someone else shows up and they follow, you get automatic followers based on who you have from Instagram. So you bootstrap that. And that was pretty surface level visible to people. But what I didn't realize until I got pretty active there is that they also took the interest graph, which is hidden to you. And so I know as an early adopter of Threads, it's like if I talk about media, if I talk about tech, I see other people talking about those things, my stuff gets promoted to them. Okay, that makes sense. That's how algorithms work. One day, out of the blue, I started talking about my dog, this big 110-pound dog. She's half St. Bernard, half Great Pyrenees. So I call her a Pyrenees, start talking about the behavior characteristics of a Pyrenees. And this thing gets 40,000 views. As far as I know, I'm like the first person to ever talk about a Pyrenees dog on Threads. But they knew who likes dogs because they had the interest graph.
All the connections of their Facebook page and their Instagram accounts and the other things that they're doing.
And I was like, wow, that I had never really occurred to me that there's a bundling advantage at that layer. And essentially, Medium is in the recommendations business. I wish I knew more about you, right? And we often talk about a cold start problem of if we don't learn enough about you early, we're going to send you really bad recommendations. We're going to lose you, right? It was such a cool realization. And then also I suspect that they have these not literal, but let's pretend file cabinets of business plans that are just waiting to be implemented if the timing is right. And it's somehow there's contingency plan, Twitter implodes. How would we compete with them? And it's just this was not a fly by night plan, right? This thing had been well thought out before they launched. This is there's so much good strategy in what they pulled off here. And so I'm also just really interested in kind of the execution, history of it. How much of this plan is more than 5 years old, right? And because it smells as a CEO, it just smells like that to me. It's whoa, this is well thought out at a level you couldn't do off the cuff. And so I don't know what you think, but I think of the three big Twitters now, X, Threads, and Blue Sky. I think Threads got it the most right. And maybe it feels a little too normie to people that went to Blue Sky, but Blue Sky feels not normie enough. So it's just really interesting to see this thing that we kind of grew up loving, right? Because we helped get Twitter out the door. We're the earliest users, right? To see it break apart and it's just fascinating, right, to watch.
It's super fascinating. People don't give Meta credit for being incredibly good at product and incredibly good at looking at what's going on and figuring out the evidence and executing. They don't end up that successful without being really good at it. And for all of their faults with trust and safety, incredibly good at privacy and trust and safety. Impossibly hard problems, but they deserve some credit.
I want to credit them for kind of a PR coup. Is when Threads said they were going to tone down politics. I think that was bullshit. If you like politics, you still get plenty of politics. I think the whole thing of what they really meant is that they were going to tone down divisiveness, which was a trust and safety thing. So I think you're much more likely, especially on politics, to get people that agree with you, and so it doesn't have the they're toning down fighting, which is what makes someone described current Twitter as the player versus player version of social media platforms. Like this is like if you play online video games and you want a place where you can get killed by the other players, like, hey, Twitter is the social media version of that. Like if I really want to put like a corporation on blast, Twitter is a good place to do it, just to really unload on any person or any organization. But Facebook knows that's not good business. They sort of tricked everyone by saying that they were going to not have that much politics, but they really meant something very specific that they managed to avoid saying.
That is an incredibly insightful and useful place to wrap this up, because we've been talking for a while. And I am super thankful to be able to have this conversation and appreciate the friendship we've had and the history and getting to watch your history and your evolution in terms of like taking that caring about people and being able to have it go from working in a small team to now cultivating this space that cares about people on a larger thing. So thank you very much, Tony.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you and for calling it out, the long friendship here, where we've gotten to see a really interesting history and evolution of the tech industry together.
Thanks again to Tony Stubblebine for coming on revolution.social. Our outro and intro music are a remix of the Italian anti-fascist song Bella Ciao, courtesy of White Records.
This episode was edited and produced by Eric Johnson from lightningpod.fm. Our executive producer is me, Alice Chan, from Flock Marketing.
To learn more about the Social Media Bill of Rights and sign up for our email newsletter, visit revolution.social.
And for many more interviews like this one, follow revolution.social on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Nostos, Fountain.fm, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And to paraphrase the Zapatistas' Subcomandante Marcos, we need a social media revolution to make revolution possible. We'll be back next week. See you then.